Well, that's prettygood.com. Yeah. The faces that she makes fun are pretty amusing. Won't be much longer.com that you can have grass, I don't think. This is October 17th. That's a no thank you, folks. Yeah, that's a no thank you. Usually she eats 10 a day, and it is salubrious. The Advertiser, the weekly newspaper, Glendora Vegetarian Club, on October 29th, the last Wednesday of the month, 2 days before All Hallowed Eve. You are invited to a delectable meal. Free orange ginger tofu and rice with vegetables. You will find it tasty and filling with satisfaction of eating healthy. Time is 6 p.m. at the Nassau Free Library, 18 Church Street, Route 20. Says Jay, founder of the American Vegan Society. The next time you are faced with a decision involving animal agony, slaughter, exploitation, keep silent a moment and think. It is foolish to battle your own conscience. Call Glendora at 518-610-5810. Fire Department, Tassawaka, Nassau, New York, Rensselaer County. History Day. History Day.
All right, cool.
Yeah. You just gotta move the clock over here.
Okay.
Not here. You know, I want to thank you so much for bringing this stuff. It's gonna make people so. Did we have a
They loan people money. I gave them some money for the help that Pat Clara's given me. This is Kurt Vincent. History, people, buildings.
Now tell me, yes, Frank Sellery wants to explain to me, is the old hand-powered pumper at the State Museum?
Kurt
He was
Vince.
telling me that it was sort of a deal that if they put it on, if it left Nassau to go on display, they would restore it. Is that
I
sort of-
don't know what the deals were, that was long before me.
Yeah.
I know we still have the hose cart.
Well,
Somewhere we have.
Glorious creation, God. What a
That's where we
creation.
ended up tracking it down.
The Rose family.
I know when I was putting
How
the
many
book
seeds in an apple?
together, Larry Cooper let me come in
How
and
many
show me
apples
those.
in one seed?
To me, those are absolutely fascinating. The biggest problem I have.
Great work, God.
All these names and all these people is trying to
It's worth asking about. I mean, I'll talk to.
I don't know who fired that. Big building, whatever it was.
No. No, they're going to do meatballs, whether it's spaghetti and meatballs or just meatballs for the side, and it's easy. I don't think there'll be anything else, but there'll be bread, there'll be salad, there'll be some sort of a more than range, and then, I think they got the volunteers who baking crew that will bake, so that they're gonna do all your time off.
Well, we were talking about an Italian, maybe.
Well, it was funny because at one of the master plans, some of the old resident folks probably like Bob
It was 80 hours, you're gonna have to do it.
talked about how
Yeah, and the chief, now you'll have homework, so like a lot of your skill stuff that you did in class, you won't be doing those, you'll be doing them at your station, and the chief has to sign off.
starting with some.
Yeah, it starts Tuesday, is the last one.
He said it was 2 or 3 o'clock.
My cousin in class did this, and he was talking about how much harder it was. So apparently they're doing that now.
Everybody else can just go over.
See, that's why I heard that conversation. Commissioners were in there.
I don't.
Putting the frame on it.
Yeah, but maybe we could get, a small. Hello. All right, how are you?
These are the last.
That's why I thought it was. Well, you would never be there, I don't think.
Nope, everything's good, everything's good, everything's good. Yep, okay, now the rest of them are lights on that side. Try it. That's the exit light. That may be it. Okay, exit lights. Nothing up here went off. Nothing up here went off. Still good. Now, I don't know what, nothing feeds out there from here, does it? Okay.
No,
Okay.
just look out that door.
All right, okay.
You should see it. Hi.
Hi, sweet.
I mean, you may, you're probably going to a lot of
Perfecto, Walter.
Okay.
Absolutely perfect.
It did turn off the TV.
Oh, it did? Okay.
Okay. Let me see.
All right, we'll try it. Thank you.
That might be this here one. Because I think that's the north wall.
Okay. That's it. Yep, okay. So, I see it go blink blink. Oh, were you shooting up? Oh, and you were shooting, oh.
What's on? Okay.
They're running here.
Okay.
So how'd they do that? They got the thumb drive or what? Oh, okay, beautiful. So we were right.
They did after that? Yeah, but they're always following me. I had a huge conversation with them yesterday.
See that one?
The phone line stuff.
When did they close these drives?
29.
When did they yank the rest of the rails?
I recognize some of them today. There's the Nassau Library
They were gone then.
and the Culligan House next to it.
Oh, okay,
That one's on Church Street, I think.
okay.
And then steam railroad used to go over the same track. Started as a steam road from Hudson to Kidder,
Right.
and then when the other one extended it, they made it.
I know, but you don't know what that is.
And that's why we still got a bus route. We gotta make a deal. When they closed it, CDTA would still come out.
Take me a minute to get into work.
So that-
Good.
Hi, how are you?
It was single lot of there, then they doubled it from Albany out to.
Well, what the double rail is, usually it goes for a mile or two, it's a sliding. See, this here is freight,
Oh, you got two?
this here has the right of way. So when they usually block it to where they gotta be on the siding when the passenger goes by, and then they come back out.
The bridge down below Nassau. Oh, nice. You'll see where they built, when they doubled it.
We just got, I worked for Penn Central.
From the family.
That, Todd Rail, when she executive retired. And sometimes I would ride the rail as a mechanic, and that's what those sidings are, all of a sudden you'd be over on the siding.
Good.
See all those passes.
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I was put in charge of Melody's table.
Good for you, Mary Grace. How you feeling?
Not bad.
Yeah. How's the program going?
Oh, busy as ever.
It is good. Good for you.
Busy, busy.
You started it from zero.
Yes, I did.
My cousin got Miss
Very nice table.
Oh, she's got beautiful things. If you've ever been in her home and saw the other items, it's beautiful, beautiful. She's.
I might have to speak. If I'm able to come to it for the 75th anniversary, I might speak.
That's awesome. Hi, Glendora. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Nice table.
I remember this new flag because
The new one.
Alice,
Ooh,
someone
nice.
here is wondering what the.
Pretty much, but that was alleviated.
I remember that Alice, someone that was here, I was telling her about the flag, the new flag.
This is the first time that exchange the small particles.
Did you take it off the gym or the cafeteria?
The variants were here in 27.
So I have tables like every year we do a flag.
That's Madam Librarian, Catherine
The
Chansky.
whole school vote.
Yeah, I didn't want to get it dirty on the table. Would they let me do it?
It's been approved by
Emergency
planning
SCBA's
board
does not mean they're interior.
in the village, and yet that's all in there.
Means that if they're gonna vent a roof,
It was
they can put it,
approved
they can
to
put an
non-conforming
SCBA.
sign.
That's the way that it reads.
So then Stephanie, the attorney, got back to me and was like, oh, yeah, we have another variance request.
I think
I'm like, I hope there's not more. I hope that now everybody. But yeah, the landscaping, they actually had to do some landscaping changes because.
On our list, it says emergency is only the unpaid service.
Yeah, there's some trees, there's a fence. Yeah.
Osby's have always addressed, I guess it must have been intentional.
Here's a class B.
You all set?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You know about the Congo Indians, right?
No,
No? That's sad.
that's that I don't know.
Yes, because see, we would dress when they would, the patroon would send the sheriffs out to foreclose on people's property.
Which Indian?
We're not really Indian, we're really just regular townspeople. But the patroon back in the 1800s would send out sheriff to foreclose on our property because they would not allow us to own.
1840.
Exactly. So now you know the story.
Oh,
Hi, Pat. I'm just camping out in the house.
Randy's old car.
Oh, yeah. It's a beauty.
Hello. Welcome.
Not very well, so.
What's that, fellas?
What's this?
That.
This?
The tank, yeah.
Yep, this is an air pack, an older style air pack versus a newer style.
And what's it do?
This is what they use when they go in a building to breathe. This is
Go to
your air,
building to
breathing
breathe.
air. Yep.
You put that on your back?
Yep. They got a bunch of different series over there, actually, the different styles.
Oh,
Same thing, just over the different generations, how they've changed.
and they got better because they got lighter?
Lighter and more efficient, yeah.
Yeah.
Better regulator, so your breathing was more effortless.
Really?
Yeah, these are harder breathing, these old ones. That's probably from late 60s, early 70s.
Oh,
This is late 80s, and that's 2009.
how long are they good for?
Most of the bottles, you got to replace those every 15 years.
15 years? And when you get in the building, how long do they last you?
If you breathe nice and easy, about 30 minutes.
No, really? When's the last time you used one?
Probably a few months.
Really? What kind of a fire was it?
Dryer fire.
What?
Dryer.
Yeah,
Cold
really?
dryer, yeah.
A close dryer.
Yeah, they create a lot of smoke, so anytime there's smoke, we have to wear those.
I have a 1980 Lincoln and a 1993 Lincoln, and I get tired of going out and starting them every day.
Yep.
So I decided to hibernate them. And I put stable in the 1980 Lincoln, okay? And with amount of gasoline. This is under the guidance of John Schumann at Ultraloop.
Yep, he does all my work too.
He's good.
Yes, very good.
And I left it, that was in the barn next door. Then I went over to my property, to my garage, and I disconnected the negative terminal of the 1993 Lincoln. Now when I came back to the barn where the 1980 Lincoln was, it was filled with smoke. Smoke was coming out of the back of the barn, smoke was coming out of the front of the barn. What do you think that was?
Jeez, was the negative terminal touching something? And
No, it was fine.
That doesn't make any sense.
I don't know what that was because I had started the 1980 Lincoln the day before and he was beautiful. Do you think there's something in that stable that he didn't like?
Could be, it could be some kind of chemical reaction, just burns up
Yeah.
a little different than normal gas. Sure.
I got in there as fast as I could and turned it off. And it took
Could have been a mouse nest in the muffler too. They crawl up the muffler, it'll build a big nest, and that'll burn inside of there until it's gone, and they create a lot of smoke. That's probably what it was.
Really?
Yeah. But if you look back to where your exhaust comes out, there's probably a pile of whatever mice bring in there. Right
Oh,
there.
really?
I've had that happen before.
Really? You had it happen?
Yeah.
Poor mouse. And it took it 10 minutes to clear.
Oh yeah.
And after that, it's not going to run until spring. It's a very interesting car. It's a 1980 Lincoln town car, Mark VI Continental. It's the only year they did that.
Did that? Yeah. You gotta keep it forever and ever.
300,000 miles.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Now tell me what your video is, honey.
Well, this one here now, this is Delson's.
Oh, this is Delson?
Delson's Fire.
And what are they doing there?
This was the day after the fire when they were cleaning things up. This is some news videos.
And how did the boys start the fire?
You know, I don't know. I wasn't there. This was the time when we had the arsonists going around.
Yes.
Matter of fact, the same day while they were fighting this fire, he lit Frank Celery's fire.
Yes, in the front of this house, not the house where he is now.
Right there.
Yep, right there. That's Maureen and I know each other quite well. Oh, isn't it ugly?
And I believe the kid ended up being one of the kids that Frank and Maureen had taken in.
No.
No, that's not true.
No, I say that in. Isn't that disgusting?
Someone was almost intent on burning the village of Nassau to the ground. But authorities got lucky after a long investigation and arrested a 12-year-old boy at the scene of one of the fires last night. And just a lot of things came together last night. And
you know who that is?
Voluntarily to come down and talk to us at the state police barracks.
No, tell me.
That's the old
along
chief.
with his guardian, there's his mother and his sister. And
Is that Frank?
led to another, and
No, that's
we
chief
got a
of police.
statement, and then we took him over to the detention facility in Winesville. 13 News learned that the boy charged
Avery?
and reckless endangerment lived at one time or other in 2 of the buildings that burned. But when a fire broke out in this apartment last night at 1 a.m., the 12-year-old was being questioned by authorities.
Old video.
Police Chief Thomas Labuda says the investigation
You know,
is
it's
still
wonderful.
open. Chris Bruner, 13 News in Nassau.
And they never rebuild it.
Yeah. And then this is Millbrook.
Millbrook, tell me
That's
about
Millbrook
that.
Kitchens.
Oh, yeah.
That was and still is the largest mutual aid fire in Rensselaer County's
The
history.
largest what, dear?
Mutual aid fire.
What's that mean?
Meaning most departments called the one fire
Oh, okay.
in the history of Rensselaer County.
Really?
Yes.
How many?
I have no idea what the actual total was. That was before I was a member.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is a good display. And you're Tassawa?
No, this is the Nassau.
This is Nassau.
No,
Town of Nassau?
a village of Nassau. This is the village of Nassau Fire Department.
Village of Nassau, yes.
And so this just kind of shows some of the history, the evolution of the helmet, the bugle.
Yeah, what's the bugle?
What that was used for is the chief was always assigned one of those, and in the days before we had radios, that's how the chief would bark out his orders and what he wanted done.
Oh, really?
Yes. So that's the symbolism of the bugle.
Yeah. What are these over here, boys?
This is part of Tassawassas, but this is how they, back in the day, did your mutual aid. And so on your first call, second call, and third call, like alarms today, these would be your pre-designated mutual aid assignments and the apparatus. So this kind of showed you what department had as far as equipment. This breaks out each department, how many engines they had, tankers.
You had to know a lot.
And then this would be for Tassawassa. This is their probably their charter members. I don't know where Eric's over there. He could probably explain this better. I assume this is his charter stuff. Hey Eric, these two things, these are your charter members for the company and auxiliary. Is that what this is?
Yeah, yeah.
And these are current?
Those were all the initial members, some of these have to be updated for this gentleman deceased last year, so we have to update them.
I guess when the village had their 175th anniversary,
Kurt
I
Vincent.
put together a simple
Photograph
document
book of
regarding
Nassau.
the village's history, and ever since then I've been listening and talking and sort of collecting things. So this is an outcome of that effort, and I'm still looking for things. So if any of you folks have Nassau things, town of Nassau, bordering on Skodak, please let me know. I'd love to share them. What I do is I electronically scan them. It doesn't hurt them. It doesn't cause any damage, but it preserves them. And I'm working with the library to add that collection to the Nassau Local History Collection. And everything will be to a point where hopefully you could sit home on your computer and go to the Nassau Library website and you could see these images. So, you know, you don't have to live here to enjoy it. So anyway, what I'm going to do today, and I'm sort of the modern side of the history lesson today, is 3 things that maybe you did or maybe you didn't know about Nassau. Sort of a cutesy title for some of our more recent history. Some things that you say, oh wow, I never knew that. So this is sort of the oh wow section. Unfortunately, I'm not that good with computers and projectors to be able to stand up there and have the pictures move, so I got to stand back here. Here we are. Welcome to Nassau, a growing community. 1997. It hasn't grown much. Actually, it's kind of going the other way. But this was as you came right down Route 20 before you got into the village. It's amazing to look at this picture now because it has totally changed. It's all overgrown. It's gone to rack and ruin. Of course, we know in Nassau history, original the Mohegan Indians were here. The fine gentleman with his Dutch lace collar, Henry Hudson, and the Dutch, the manor of Rensselaer. Was our starting point. An old map of Nassau. If your eyes are good, you can see that we've got Nassau as a town here, and somehow Nassau as a community got moved all the way to the east here towards Stephentown. Brainerd's Bridge, Brainerd of course farther east, and then where the Valatia Kill and the town of Skodak, Union Village. So yes, indeed, the village of Nassau, which was incorporated in 1819, did have several name changes until it finally adopted the name of the town, not the other way around. And this is East Nassau, so I guess they got subsequently to be East Nassau, and you see Pike's Pond, which of course is still there. And I would suspect Martin's Lake is probably Burden Lake. I don't know if any of you guys can elaborate that. And of course this little dot here, that was what we call Nassau. So this is very, very early, about the 1830s. So things improved from then. They really built great highways, electricity is going in. I call this slide, all roads lead to Nassau. So pretty rural. And of course you could buy your postcard at Brainerd Station. Farmers and plows, and the town of Nassau at one time had the 2nd highest production of buckwheat in the county. So farming was a big industry here. If you had a farm and you grew buckwheat, you had to grind it to make the flour, to make the product sellable. This is the building that some of us still call Speedy Sales in the village of Nassau. If you get to the red light, turn right onto Elm Street, and where Elm Street splits, that building still sits there, vacant, unfortunately. Someone has deep pockets. It would be wonderful to get that building. The interesting thing with that grist mill, one of the Hogues was the first person instrumental in that, as in Hogue's Corners. The property also included the lake, because you needed the water in the lake to produce the power to turn the wheels. And that stayed in existence for many, many years. I'll get into that. Of course, we also had the largest pork producer in southern Rensselaer County was right in Nassau, the Winter Brothers. This was on Elm Street. And I always look at the guy on the right-hand side with that huge cleaver. You can imagine what his job must have been. And there seems to be a little bit of a distance between him and the other guys. Maybe he dispatched the hogs, I don't know. Well, as time went on, the village and town grew into quite the commercial hub. This is what we would now call Route 20 or Albany Avenue, as if you were standing at the red light looking west towards Albany. On the right-hand side, the 2-story building, that has virtually remained unchanged. That's the Nassau merchandising or the hardware store. The little building, the brown building, that was a blacksmith shop. And one of the theories on this picture is it was a July 4th in the 1930s. So you still have a combination of horses and you have automobiles, but take away the trees and really there hasn't much changed in that scene today. So, the juicy stuff, Nassau Lake's secret history. There it is in all its pristine beauty. About the 1890s, pretty much farming area all around it. The lake again was owned, the rights to the lake were owned by the grist mill. People would rent boats, there were hotels, there were boat rentals. Victorian idyll. This is from the porch of the Boyce house. Boyces were a big farming family in Skodak. The house is still there. You can't quite see the lake anymore, but it's still there. And I always like that big, I don't know what kind of a ornamental palm or a yucca or something. Those were the days, huh? And of course, where the little girl is, I don't have a pointer here. We know what this thing is?
Yeah.
Carriage horse block, right. We walk up there so you don't have to lift your legs up. Wouldn't be very ladylike, I don't think. Looking across Nassau Lake, so it was, early on, it was considered as a recreation area. People from Albany, they always had to come from somewhere else, bought up property. The first farmer who started selling lots was named Morey. Today we have Morey Park Road, but his family were the first ones that started selling off some of the farmland for people to come and build summer accommodations. Morey Park, Nassau Lake, and you can see some buildings. There were hotels. There were plans to build a Presbyterian chapel there to have worship service during the summer months. I like to think of this as the tide is out on Nassau Lake. And all the way down the bottom corner, you can see, just make out Lynn Brothers, and Lynn Brothers were the second of the three pharmacies in Nassau. First was Burroughs, then Lynn, and then Nassau Pharmacy Waters. So you can kind of date the postcards by when the name was on there. And this has been colorized, obviously. So the big thing that happened in the 1890s, turn of the century, was the railroad, the trolley car line. We tend to refer to it as the Albany Southern because they had the ownership for the longest number of years, but there were a succession of companies that introduced the line. And in its entirety, it ran from Albany, the D&H building, the D&H Plaza, across the bridge to Rensselaer. What used to be the Albany Public Market on the north side of Columbia Turnpike, that now is, there's an Aldi's and a Rite Aid, I guess, and now there's another store back in there. That used to be their barn area. Extended from Rensselaer to Nassau and then further south, and you could go to Hudson. Because Hudson was where the action was. And sort of modest cabins there, but you can still see the barn from the original farmstead. And there's the line of all the stops. This was taken from a book in 1973, Third Rails, Pantographs, and Trolley Poles, which is, as far as I know, about the only work that's ever been done on that railroad line that has a lot of details. But the thing that I always have been amazed at is how many stops there were. And the capital letters indicate stops that were made on every route. If it is in lowercase, that was a stop that they would stop if there was somebody there or if the signal was up. Now the railroad carried both passengers and freight. So many of those stops were what they called milk stops, where someone who had dairy cattle would get the milk, put it in the cans, and then put it at the station for the train to pick up. Because here in the village we had a creamery, and then North Chatham, every stop along the way had creameries. But if you were in East Greenbush on Electric Avenue, appropriately named, you would then go to Garrison's, Kell's Crossing, Howard's Crossing, Best's Crossing, Nassau Lake Park, Brayside, Rosencrantz, Merchants Crossing, and then finally get to Nassau. So from East Skodak, you had the possibility of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stops before you got actually into the village. And then you could continue south down through North Chatham, Niverville, Kinderhook, Stuyvesant, Stockport, Stockville, and then Hudson City. And this is one of the cars in Nassau. If again you go down to the red light here, turn right onto Elm Street, go to the fork, turn left again as if you're going to East Skodak. This is just beyond the village limit, just over the creek. This was Merchants Crossing because the merchant family lived in that big house that's on the left-hand side. On the right was a wagon shop owned by the Veely family. And Mr. Veely was an amateur photographer, and we owe a great thanks to him and his sons for taking a lot of pictures of Nassau from this time period, and that's why we have these pictures. Of course, it was an electric railroad. They weren't steam engines or diesel engines. They derived their power by what's called a third rail, which was another piece of metal in the rail bed, and there were couplers on the cars. Now, this was constant current. And I'm not an electrician, so I can't tell you if it was AC or DC, but that electricity was running through that line all the time. If you were misfortunate enough to step on it and then step on something else and make a current, make a connection, it was fatal. So it was inherently dangerous. There aren't too many stories of people being hurt, but there are many, many stories about dogs, farm animals, cows wandering onto the tracks. So that perhaps could have led partially to the demise of the third rail network. In some places they did have the wires, not everywhere. In stations they tended to have the wires overhead.
Was that the first house on the left as you go across the bridge?
It would be the second house.
There was an interesting thing about the, if you can you go back to that one?
Yep.
The third rail didn't go across the road. And so they would come to a crossing like that and they would coast across the road.
They'd have to have enough momentum.
And if you look at the ones that are in the post office, you can see the third rail come up and stop, and then not 2 feet away was a walkway or something.
Yeah. So there were precautions. Obviously they were aware of it, but in the open stretches it was pretty dangerous. So again, Nassau Lake, we got a few more cabins or tourist accommodations. A lumber merchant from Albany, Mr. Welsh, bought a point of land on the lake, built a bungalow, and named it Braeside. He was of Scottish descent and used that as an influence for the name. That building still stands there, and there are some maps that still refer to Braeside as being over at Nassau Lake. Now, the big news, 1924, the local newspaper, the Knickerbocker News and its predecessor, had a promotional scheme to sell lots at Nassau Lake to make a vacation colony, Nassau Lake Park. 364 good lots, high and dry, all directly on or near Nassau Lake Road. It was a time payment scheme. You put down $20-some and you paid $5 a month. They were very small lots, granted. Most people would buy 2-3 lots. But it was an amazing concept at the time. And they had 3 different areas, well over 1,000 lots that they were purporting to sell. And they did not sell 1,000 lots, but they did sell many. Some of the street names are still there. But this was really, when you stop to think about it, a pretty amazing thing for this little community out here to have such extensive development. There's never been anything since. So they played it up. The Knickerbocker Presses purchased Nassau Lake. Yes, the grist mill went out of business because by the 1920s, water power was no longer used to grind grain, and they purchased the rights to the lake and then surrounding properties for the members of the Nassau Lake Colony. So if you bought property, you had exclusive use of that lake. And Nassau Lake has never been, and still is not, there is no public access to Nassau Lake. A park and a clubhouse, they did build a clubhouse. That was there for many years. And again, Rosecrans, there's a Rosecrans Drive, and this whole area was going to be filled with housing. And representatives on property daily, auto routes to Nassau Lake Park. And there's how you get there from Albany to Pittsfield. Albany Southern Trolley Service, that's what made it possible, because you could take the trolley if you didn't have a car. Judging by the traffic, Nassau Lake Park is a busy place, as so many who have cottages there go to Albany to business each day, and Sundays the traffic is especially heavy, 1925. So the trolleys ran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day, except on Sundays. And it spawned accommodations, hotels, modest restaurants. Now, the fire department, if you look at their display, they have pictures of this building on fire when it had been turned into apartments many, many, many years later. But at that time, it was a hotel. Now, I wouldn't say they got a 5-star rating. It was pretty modest. But nevertheless, you know, the Heinz ketchup bottles on the table, and the menu, I think, said ham and cheese sandwiches, or cheese or ham sandwiches, and that was the extent of their menu. But that's what you could find. The last of the trolley cars ran in 1929, and this picture, if you can believe the date on the back, was taken in December 30th of 1929, and a railroad guy I showed this to, he said, well, it's probably a work detail to remove things. So you got the first car, and then a flatbed, and then I guess a caboose on the back. So that was a pretty sad day, because Nassau thrived through that trolley line. Prior to it leaving, they did negotiate with United Traction in Albany for buses. Now, Nassau Lake Park, I'm getting ahead of myself. By 1933, when we had the Depression, the Troy Times record, these are all foreclosures. Each one of those is a lot at Nassau Lake. So just across the board, people lost their property. However, the newspaper and its benevolence deeded over Nassau Lake to an association of homeowners. And that association is still in existence. They had field days. This is looking back on how good the newspaper was to the people, etc., etc., etc. They had dances. This is a Halloween dance at the quote-unquote clubhouse, which was on the Nassau, the east side of the lake. Always been a contentious issue, because half is in Nassau, half is in Schodack. So the Nassau people had wanted to eliminate the new scourge of water skiing. And in Nassau, they had a law that said you can't water ski on Nassau Lake, but the Schodack people wouldn't go for it. So they were going to put boat patrols out there to prevent them from crossing over. Improvement Group hails Nassau Lake's future. So into the 50s, they were still trying to get things going, on and off, on and off. The great idea was they were going to sell the lake to the state, to be a state park. They heard that the state was looking for new properties to turn into parks. 1963 didn't work out. They reject the offer. So they're back sort of to the starting point. Then the issue was that as it was private property, there were taxes. And if you had to pay the taxes, and they got the taxes from the association owners. So of course, that was the issue. Nassau Lake Improvement Association still exists. This is their website as of a few days ago. They're still out there. And the bus service that was started way back when, the trolley service that was ended was picked up by the bus service to Albany. And I believe you still go on some of the routes from Nassau to Albany via Nassau Lake, and that's a legacy of that trolley car line. So 1932, here's the bus sitting at the village square. That would be about where the big tree is. The gazebo is where the pine tree is now, on looking down Chatham Street, and there's the bus and the state sign. One arrow points Nassau Lake, the other points to North Chatham. Where else would you want to go? All right. So, speed traps. Has anyone ever heard that? You know, some people know that Nassau might be a speed trap. It's not true, is it? No. So here we've got the little village of Nassau in the middle at 402 feet. We are fortunate enough to have a U.S. Geological Survey marker right in the square, and it's 402 feet. However, going to the east up towards us is Lord's Hill, 800 feet, and going in the other direction towards Albany Bunker Hill at 600 feet. So you've got a nice little dip in the evolution, a perfect speedway, I call it. So consequently, the village citizens and the village government has always been concerned with traffic going too fast in Nassau. So the first full-time professional police officer, C. Lowell Avery, Doc Avery to his friends, Wyatt Earp to his foes. He had been an investigator in New York City. He was born in Albany, played saxophone in the Albany High School band, was in the Navy during World War II. His wife was from Warrensburg. So he was hired in 1954 to be the first full-time policeman. And there are accounts saying that as there was only one policeman in Nassau, he immediately assumed the title as chief. And in purchasing uniform materials, got the gold braid and not the silver braid, and got the scrambled eggs, and got the badges, and got the stripes. So Mr. Avery was 6 foot 2 inches tall. He was an imposing figure. In the summertime, he wore the dark glasses. And then, of course, if you have a policeman, you have to have a police car. So this is the first car bought specifically for the police department. Prior to that, the village government, in its cost-cutting ways to save taxpayers, would often purchase used cars from village board members and equip them with a siren and a light, and that would be the police car. At one time, there was a Hudson, which was a village police car. I don't know if any of you know Hudsons, but they were great big bathtub-shaped cars, so that might have been something. Again, we're at the village corner. We're looking across Route 20 towards Elm Street. On the right-hand side, it says Frank's, so it's Frank's store. It's now the antiques dealer. And on the left-hand side, the mobile station, which is defunct. And there he is in his winter garb. He was a very imposing person. And the car was a light baby blue, which you wouldn't think today would be a police car. Soon after he arrived, the village justice who handled the tickets, the citations, quit because Chief Avery was so efficient in ticketing people. I've spoken to people who said my mother was driving 26 miles an hour in a 25 zone and she got a ticket. And there are many, many stories about that. And he was a stickler. So the justice who suddenly went from 10, 15 tickets a month to 220 said, forget it. And I don't know if anybody here is a descendant of that individual, but I had to hear some family stories. And this was picked up by the news, an editorial in the Knickerbocker News. You can't tell police to stop enforcing the law. So they, it's one of those 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Yes, you want to have police coverage, but you can't be selective. One-man police force proves efficient. Village policeman says speed, ticket, cheap insurance. That was a story that was picked up by United Press and carried throughout the country. California papers had it, Florida papers had it. Everybody knew about the village of Nassau and the speed issue. Judge Lamb became the next judge, James Lamb. He replaced the guy that was overworked. James Lamb, unfortunately, didn't have a background in law enforcement or motor vehicle. He was a wait station attendant. But in his defense, he did state that he had 2 son-in-laws who were with the state police. So Judge Lamb ran court twice a week out of his house and stayed in business for many, many, many years. Big aficionado of Little League baseball, involved with the Little League, had only daughters, no sons. The baseball field is now named in his honor. And there were some issues. Santa bagged by Nassau police. A man dressed in a Santa costume was stopped by the police. And luckily, he didn't complain too much. And as the chief handed Santa his summons, Santa said to him, "Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." So the chief's car was stoned. There's other stories, and I have heard people swear it's true, just like in the movies. They distracted the policeman when he was out of his parked car, tied a rope to the back bumper to a tree. Somebody said, "Oh, there goes a speeder," or something to get the guy to run in the car, got in the car, floored it, and sure enough left the bumper behind. And you think those things are only in the movies. Now today, there are such a thing as websites that tell you about speed traps. And look at that, Nassau is still on the list. As someone who lives on Route 20, I don't have a problem with that. All right, now how about the Route 20 bypass? We've got some folks here that aren't that old. Any of you remember the big to-do in Nassau about building a bypass around the village? Well, you're going to find out. Route 20 had a lot of accidents. It has always been a commercial route. A lot of truck jackknifing accidents before they developed the technology to prevent that. One case in particular, the truck sheared off the top of a car with 5 people, and all 5 people died. So that started two things. It started garages that could handle these vehicles, and there you see the first tow truck in Nassau, Sturm's Garage, which as you go back towards Nassau Village will be now Bigelow's Customs Car. Was there for many years, several generations, and they modified vehicles to make tow trucks out of them, and accidents happened, automobiles demolished, and very serious accidents, and it got the attention. 5 killed and crashed near Nassau. State rushing Route 20 bypass, state to rebuild Route 20 in area. Now, of course, to build a bypass, you have to have some consensus on where it's going to go. Well, I don't know if it's just Nassau folks or what, but they never got to a consensus. Nassau rejects the plans. 1165 opposed the plan. So it was always a contentious issue. There were 3 initial routes planned in 1967, and this had been going on since the 40s. But by 1967, the State Highway Department came out with 3 distinct routes, 2 of them to the south of the village and 1 to the north. Well, the ones to the south, the farmers didn't like because it would take farmland away. The one to the north, people in the village didn't like because it would either cut across Elm Street with a viaduct, or it would have an exchange that would demolish 51 buildings. Well, you take 51 buildings away from Elm Street and you don't have much left. So there was great opposition, and I can remember as a young person going with my parents to Nassau School to hear the state presentation on these 3 routes, and someone that we knew who lived on Elm Street got up and very upset, very passionate, said, "I'm not going to live with my family under any viaduct," and he stamped his fist. He said, "I'll be damned if I'm going to live in the shadow of some highway bridge." And he was very much outraged. So consequently, none of it happened. And you had different groups supporting different routes. And all the time I'm thinking about this. Well, what about I-90? How did they ever get I-90? And sure enough, what they call the Albany-Lebanon Road was delayed, and then they built I-90 in 1974. I-90 to exit 9 was open to East Greenbush. So it was really a contentious issue. But think of it today, if we didn't have the traffic on Route 20 in the village, how pleasant it would be. So greetings from Nassau. Why didn't you tell Mama before the feature started? As the little boy is rushed off towards the restroom with a pool underneath him. So Nassau humor has always been pretty good. Obviously a souvenir, a stock photo, and printed with greetings from Nassau. So these are 3 things that maybe you didn't know about Nassau. And I appreciate you sitting here. And if you're interested, I left a little thing. For the last year or so, I've been taking some of these stories and putting them in our Beautification Committee's newsletter online. Unfortunately, it's only online, so you need to go to the library or somewhere if you don't have a computer. And there's a bunch of stories on there. How Elm Street got its name, the story of Delson's. Many people remember Delson's. There once was a newspaper printed in Nassau. Many recollections of people growing up in Nassau. So if you're interested, about every month one of those comes out. I can't tell you what the next one is, but it's going to be big. It's going to be big. Well, and if any of you have stories or recollections or pictures or documents, or your family built a house here in 1954 and you still have the bill of sale, things like that are just fascinating. Keep them in the village so that future generations can find out what was here before. So thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy your day. Don't forget to see the Calico Indians. Nassau in the anti-rent wars in the 1820s, 1830s. I see a Calico Indian wandering out there. There's food, there's drinks, there's all sorts of stuff. So, thank you very much.
How much did I miss? How long? What time did it start? Yeah, you did it. He is really? Yeah, there.
We don't know. The wooden Negro, I looked that up, or attempted to look it up, and I haven't found anything. I mean, I've asked, I don't, people don't really know.
Sounds like a mannequin or something.
Well, that...
Not likely to be. The only thing I can think of is wooden Indian. Yeah. But what purpose for it?
Show me. That doesn't really seem to be likely thing. Wooden Negro. The only thing that interesting come into my mind, aside from that, would be some sort of a sturdy frame that he could attach things to if he was working on, you know, I don't know, some little project with leather or something.
And it's listed among the farm implements section, so presumably it has something to do with that. He had blacksmith tools too. So he had a skill in addition to farming.
Quite likely or possibly.
Or making his own implements.
I was noticing just above that, it says it's a set of harness, and they do the first S looking like an F, like you see in German.
Old English. Prior to Noah Webster, he did away with that when he did his dictionary. Really?
Do you know what a beetle and wedge is?
Beetle is a hat like what we call a mallet.
Yeah.
Ball instead of
Or splitting board.
You wonder what hand irons are. Hand irons with brass heads. Hand irons.
Okay, that would be like for the fireplace.
I bet it's an andiron, and just spelling it strangely. I think there's a lot of that going on.
The hand irons would be ones that...
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay, with the brass head would be that ornamental. And then plain would be something maybe in the kitchen.
Okay.
Here again, this kitchen is a little bit fuller and a little bit more detailed. One of the things that is interesting, you see 3 beehives.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I can tell you that while not totally rare, you don't see that very often in urban dwellings. And I suspect there were people who had beehives who didn't really think to include them. Others did. But certainly it was something valuable.
Find that passage, but he explored the coast of upper North America. He is the first man who sails supposedly up what is today the Hudson River. There's a strong possibility that French traders had come down the river from Canada before Henry, but be that as it may, we won't quibble. The Dutch looking to colonize this area failed in a governmental form, and so they authorized the Dutch West India Company to take on the obligation and the responsibilities that came with colonizing the area. Through a series of misstarts, they end up giving a large land grant to a man named Kilian van Rensselaer, a Dutch merchant, diamond merchant, pearl merchant. He is given basically feudal authority to exercise over whatever land he acquires here in the area. He decides, looking at maps and in particular reading the written records from Robert Jouet, who had traveled with Hudson on the voyage over in 1609. Your American textbooks say they were lusting after the fur-bearing animals. Well, that's true, but if you read Jouet's journal about the voyage, what he really talks about is and is mind-boggled by is the timber. The trees here. Oh yeah, there's fur-bearing animals and there's native people, but mother of God, you gotta see these trees! And this is at a point when Europe has been largely denuded of timber. So this is really what they want. But anyway, Kilian Van Rensselaer is given what is literally feudal powers over the land. He is the executive, he is the legislative, he is the judicial power, he is the be-all and end-all in this area. And he establishes, following the feudal tenures of the European experience, he establishes a very strong leasehold ownership over his land holdings. If you come in, and he has a legal obligation to Dutch West India Company to bring in at least 50 families, if you take a land grant from the patroon, you are given the right to sit on the land. You may use the land, but you don't own the land. It's feudalism brought to North America. You have no right to the minerals underneath the ground. You have no right to the timber other than what is absolutely necessary for your existence. You have no right to the water that flows through without paying extra for those privileges. He is literally a baron in Netherlands looking out to his holdings in North America. And in 1664, when the English sail up the river and take over here, they basically confirm his rights. He's given an official British royal patent in, well, not Kilian, he's long since dead, but the fourth patroon in 1685 has his land claim confirmed by the King of England. And so it follows along. It's still very much feudal. If you guys come into the area looking to settle here, you have a claim on a piece of land, but you owe him a perpetual ground rent. And that, since there's no cash money, is largely in the form of usable goods. Most of the deeds will have language very similar to something saying your ground rent is 4 bushels of good merchantable winter wheat and 6 fat hens and a day's service with your horse and wagon, because he'd use you to go out and get firewood for his home. So that was your annual ground rent. It's not cash money necessarily. There are some real legal issues about this, and well, I'm a book guy, so I'll go off on this real quick, just because most everybody asks me what they can look to. Probably the most readable history about this entire episode is Henry Chrisman's famous Tin Horns and Calico. It's a very readable history. It's a very good resource. Henry, I will admit to you, is clearly anti-rent. I mean, he grew up over in the hill towns of Albany County. He is not a guy who supports the patroons and the rent system, but it's an eminently readable book. On the far end of the scale, this is Charles McCurdy's The Anti-Rent Era in New York Law and Politics, 1839 to 1865. This book, I'm not hesitant at all to call this brilliant. Charles McCurdy is a professor of history at University of Virginia, and he teaches constitutional law at UVA Law School. I mean, the man really knows his stuff. His analysis of the political and legal ramifications of this whole period is stunning in its depth and complexity. That said, I must also warn you that his writing style is ponderous at best. This is a man who has never once met a 14-letter word that he didn't love to pieces. I mean, I'll sound egotistical when I say this, but it's been a very long time since I had to have a dictionary sitting next to me when I read something. Not only did I need my big Funkin' Wagnall sitting on my right, I needed my Black's Law Dictionary sitting on my left hand because what? What? Great. but it's not a quick, this is not something you're going to go through in a weekend. Trust me on that one. Suffice it to say, and I just saw Kathy walk in and she loves this line, I think, I got a lot of really good naps while I was reading the And right in the middle, this is one that came out actually not long ago. This is Reeve Huston's Land and Freedom, Rural Society, Popular Protest, and Party Politics in Antebellum, New York. This is his doctoral dissertation that was re-edited and printed. It's a very readable, certainly more convoluted than Chrisman's overview, but this is well worth the read if you want to study more on this. Okay, now, this system, feudal as it is endorsed by the British government in 1685. The patroon, basically following the standard British system, makes sure that Governor Lovelace is well taken care of. And oh, surprise, surprise, the king decides to grant the Van Rensselaers the same rights they had under the Dutch. There is resistance to this. Especially very early on down in Columbia County. This is outside the Rensselaerwick patroonship, but down in Columbia County, the original Robert Livingston, and this is also part of the story about how corrupt this system was. The original Robert Livingston gets a land grant from Governor Cornbury, British governor of New York. Probably the most corrupt governor we've ever had in New York, although his successor does his best to make sure that Cornbury appears to be a piker. But Cornbury basically gives a 1,500-acre grant along the east shore of the Hudson River in today's Columbia County to Livingston. This is the period where Massachusetts is also claiming that their land grant extends all the way to the shores of the Hudson. And so Massachusetts is giving land grants into what is today New York State. And Governor Cornbury, looking to stop that intrusion, gives, among others, Robert Livingston a second land grant, only this time it's on the far eastern edge of New York State, abutting today's Massachusetts, and it's 1,000 acres. And unfortunately, in the land grant, it says that this is in company with the 1,500s he has. Well, now it's on the west end of New York, over next to the river, and it's contiguous to. And so Livingston declares himself to be the owner of 100,000 plus acres between the Massachusetts border and the river. Well, and he starts evicting all of these other people who've gotten small land grants. Oh, I'm the owner of all this, because he's got 2 separate land grants for 2,500 acres. So, of course, Governor Cornbury says, oh, hang on a second now, Livingston, this is an outrage. I mean, you know, you have to come down here to my office and we're going to work this out. Oh, well, that's a very weighty argument you make. Yes, you're absolutely correct. You own the whole thing. And that's how the Livingstons get Columbia County. I mean, disgustingly corrupt, but yeah, hey, you know, who cares? It's just, you know, those people can't defend themselves, so we're not worried. But anyway, there are revolts against the system down there in 1755 and again in 1766. In the 1790s and again in 1819, there are major revolts down in what's called the Blenheim patent down in today's Schoharie County, when the patroon down there attempts to shift off to short-term leases, and most of the farmers who are already there have been told that just as the Van Rensselaers do, you own this, you get, if anything in writing, a deed, and because you can't read it, the fact that you're still owing lease payments means nothing. You think you own it. And it's the same thing down here. And one of the major owners down in that area, by the way, is William Cooper, the father of James Fenimore Cooper. So if you pay any attention to Fenimore Cooper's writings during this period, he is very much pro-rent because, of course, his father is a landowner, a patroon down there in Otsego. So of course, James Fenimore Cooper is raised as the son of a landowner. He's certainly pro-rent, not anti-rent. Yeah, anyway. To make a long story short, I'm probably failing to do that. By 1840, there were an estimated 260,000 landholders in the state of New York, scattered over 16 counties throughout the Hudson River Valley, the Catskill Mountains, the Mohawk Valley, and the Susquehanna Valley, who are actually living on and farming land that they cannot legally own. That's 10% of the population of the state of New York is trapped in this feudal leasehold system. And it's not sitting well. Now, the real genesis of the anti-rent war, as we're going to discuss it, comes to us because of the existence of Stephen Van Rensselaer III. Most of you will recognize the term that he earned in his lifetime, the good patroon. Stephen inherits 726,000 acres when his father dies while Stephen is 5 years old. Because of the primogeniture system that the patroons had been using, Stephen is the sole heir to the patroonship. It is held in trust for him until he turns 21. His uncle, General Tenbrock of Albany, acts as his agent, and he maintains the system up until Stephen turns 21 in 1785. Now, Stephen's got the extremely good sense to be a patriot during the Revolutionary War. So the patroonship is not taken from him because he's not a Tory sympathizer. He's a patriot, even though he doesn't fight in any way or participate. But nobody hassles his ownership interests in 1785 when he becomes out of his minority and inherits. Now, he's confronted with a very interesting issue because 3 years earlier, the 1782 New York State Constitution has abolished feudal tenures. It has also abolished primogeniture. But Stephen steps in 1785, and he's looking at a patroonship that has been largely devastated by the Revolutionary War. Most of the manpower is gone. There's very few farmers left. He needs an enticement to get people to come here. And, well, he's not technically his brother-in-law, but Stephen has married one of the daughters of General Schuyler. Married to another daughter of Schuyler is Alexander Hamilton. So technically they're not brothers-in-law, but they're married to sisters, and Alexander Hamilton is quite anxious to make sure that Stephen's patroonship is maintained, and he, being a very devious and clever lawyer, has come up with what he refers to as a durable lease. It's not feudal in its nature, it's something that he just dreamed of. But what it is, you get a deed from me, Stephen, and it's exactly like what it used to say, only this time it specifically says that you have a leasehold interest in fee. Now, to lawyers, this is stunning because that's two completely different things. It's like saying you're a man and a woman. I mean, it's all together. No, it doesn't happen that way. Well, okay, it does, but again, sorry, bad choice of analogies. But anyway, you know, it's completely different. If I'm giving you a deed in fee, I'm selling you my house, it means fee is a term that means I give you all my right, title, and interest. If I'm leasing to you, it means I'm holding the fee rights. You're just leasing for a set term for a set amount. So this is a deed in fee, which is a legal fiction of the most bizarre kind. But I don't want to go off on the legalities. But anyway, so this is Alexander Hamilton's contribution to this. And the best part is they offer up the land free of charge for 7 years. So Jim, I'm letting you come in. And I'm giving you this plot of land here outside the village of Nassau, 140 acres, whatever you want, free for 7 years. And then you're going to start paying me my annual ground rent, which sounds like a good deal because that gives you time to clear the land and get some crops in and hopefully husband your animals and make, so it's not a bad deal. So this is pretty much what Stephen does through his lifetime, and we can go off on a real tangent about Stephen, and I actually do a lecture, but we won't. So he's really very lax in his enforcing of the lease payments in particular, which is what gives him the nickname, the Good Patroon. Because if you would go to see him in January with a good sob story about why you couldn't pay your ground rent for last year, he'd frequently forgive it, at least to your face. But he's putting it down in the big book, saying you owe. And so he's not forgiving anything, he's just not collecting at this point. And that's pretty good. He lives out his life. He's the richest man in New York, probably in America when he dies in 1839. And this is the crux of what we're talking about today, because since primogeniture has been abolished, he cannot give the patroonship to one son. And he's married twice. General Schuyler's daughter, the first Mrs. Stephen III, dies after producing a couple of children, including Stephen Van Rensselaer IV, her oldest son. So the patroon, Stephen III, marries a second time to the daughter of Judge Patterson of New Jersey, and she bears a couple of children as well, and their oldest son in the second marriage is William. So Stephen IV is given all of the properties in Albany County, and William Patterson Van Rensselaer is given Rensselaer County, because you can't pass it on to one favored son anymore. So that's the deal. Well, as they sit and do the reading of Stephen III's will, it basically discloses that he has an estimated $400,000 in unpaid debts. To put that number in perspective, your average working man at this time is making $200 a year, and he's in debt $400,000. And surprise, surprise, what does the big book say? It says he's got $400,000 plus in uncollected rents. And so the instruction in the will to Stephen IV in Albany and William Patterson here in Rensselaer County is collect all of the unpaid money and pay off my debts, or you will be responsible to take them on as your personal obligation. Yeah. How many think that's going to happen? Yes. So the hill towns, of course, on both sides, everybody knows the terms of the will. This has been read in March of 1840, and so everybody's quite concerned, and everybody wants to end this leasehold system. And a committee of prominent citizens from the hill towns in Albany County send a letter down to Stephen IV at the Manor House over in North Albany, asking for a meeting because they want to make a proposal to buy out the leasehold interest. Now, one of the most onerous parts of that whole leasehold interest isn't just the annual payment, but the patroon also has what's called quarter sale rights. So after I have, oh no, I gave you the 140 acres here, sorry. You all look alike, middle-aged white guys. Jim is the landowner over here. If you're looking to sell your property to him 10 years later, I, as a patroon, am entitled to 1/4 of the sale price. So, I mean, it's good to be true. And this is really upsetting to an awful lot of people, because Jim has just spent, hypothetically, 10 years cleaning this land, building a house, farming, making this, and I'm claiming 1/4 of the sale price. Ooh. So anyway, the committee gets an appointment. They come down to see Stephen Van Rensselaer IV at the Manor House. And I need to back up one step and tell you a little about Stephen IV. He is, I'm trying to be generous here, he's an arrogant prig. Okay? This is a man who is known to habitually refer to the tenant rabble. Yeah, not long ago I heard an expression that I really like and I decided I was going to steal it for this. This is a guy who was born on third base and convinces himself that he hit the triple. You like that one? Yes, I do too. So the committee comes down, and we're not talking about rabble, despite what he refers to them. As a matter of fact, of the account that we have of the people who were part of this committee, 8 of them are elders in their respective churches. There are 6 of them who are office holders in the various towns. One of them is going to be elected Albany County Clerk in 1845. I mean, this is the cream of Hilltown society who's coming to see Stephen IV. And he makes a great big show of walking out of his office and down the hallway twice, walking past the committee and studiously ignoring it. I mean, this is an appointment that he set, but I'm not talking about you. And in case you didn't catch it the first time, I'll do it twice, just to really rub your nose in it. So they leave, they're told by one of his assistants that if they will put their demands in writing, the patroon will read it. So they go to a nearby tavern and they write it out, and then they all go back up to the hill, and word follows them a couple of days later that the patroon, Stephen IV, says no. And what they have proposed is basically this. They will offer to pay $2.50 per acre to the 2 patroons, because this is a deal for both sides of the river. They will pay $30 a farm to buy out the quarter sale interest. They will pay additional money if they have running water or particularly good mineral rights. But what this really means is the 2 brothers, if they accepted this offer, would receive something in the vicinity of $1.2 to $1.4 million. Now, I mean, we're talking $200 a year, and we're offering these guys a buyout of $1.2 million. This is good money. And both of them say no. So a mass meeting is held in May of 1840 over in the town of Knox in Albany, and a rent boycott is called. And it sweeps across the 16 counties that are all under the leasehold system, even though they're not all Van Rensselaer tenants, but everybody jumps on this bandwagon. There's basically 3 forms of attack against the system. There is the boycott itself. One of the leaders of that boycott is over here in Rensselaer County, Dr. Smith Bowden of Alps, New York, in Sand Lake. Yay! Yeah, we haven't gotten to your part yet. Stay there. Be quiet, Jay. He comes up with the motto: organize, strike, resist, and vote anti-rent. He is one of the major speakers at the various rallies throughout Rensselaer County. He does travel over to Albany County, just as a number of their prominent speakers come over here. The second prong is purely political. They are going to challenge and change the laws that allow this system to exist. They call mass meetings. They're very, very influential in the first couple of years of the movement in organizing bodies within both the Democratic Party and the Whig Party. There is no Republican Party yet. The Democrats and the Whigs are the 2 big ones. And they end up founding the anti-rent party in the late 1840s as well. In 1845, they have what is probably their second best year, when they actually elect 7 of their candidates to the state assembly, 1 to the state senator, and 1 congressman. In 46, they get 11 assemblymen. So, I mean, this is a fairly strong political movement. And then the third, okay, this is your part. The funny-looking guy over here to my left, this is the so-called Calico Indians, taking the theme from the Boston Tea Party, where the Patriots were looking to dump the tea in Boston Harbor. They disguised themselves in ersatz Indian disguise, wearing calico gowns and leather masks to hide their identity. The policy is basically to protect their allies and to intimidate their foes. They organize themselves along militia lines. They use a tin horn. Which of course is the standard dinner horn around here, but they develop a policy of using the tin horn as a way of notifying the neighborhood if law enforcement comes into the area looking to evict. So that's the whole tin horns and calico title that I mentioned. That's the way they do this. Now, I'll go off very briefly on the legalities. One of the real issues that gets under everybody's craw is the fact that you, on your 140 acres out here, you pay the property taxes on the farm. The patroon doesn't. So your leasehold payment is tax-free to the patroon. The quarter sale that you're giving him is tax-free to the patroon. They don't pay anything. You do. Did I mention it's good to be the patroon? Yeah. Well, eventually in 1846, they do in fact get state legislation passed that makes the income to the landlords taxable here in the state of New York. One of the real craws, bees in the bonnet, if you will, for people was the fact that at that time, they had, the landlords largely had the right of what was called distress as a legal remedy. Jim, if you are in arrears to me and I get a judgment against you for that amount, I can send the sheriff down. And he doesn't throw you off the land. What he does is seize your personal property. Your cows, your plow, your horse, your books, your household items. And we sell those. I leave you in possession of the land, still owing me rent and leasehold payment, but you no longer have supplies to make a living. This is distress. And it's deeply offensive to people, and so they end distress as a legal remedy in 1847. And they also ask for the legal right to buy out the landlord's interest at the time of that landlord's death. That never comes to be. There are major legal issues, and I don't want to go off on a long tangent here. Basically, the two major arguments against the patroon ships in themselves was the fact that these were clearly deceptive in their inducement. I mean, you come to me for that 140 acres, and I'm telling you I'm giving you a deed in fee, and yet what I'm giving you is a lease. And so that's clearly fraudulent because you don't have a lawyer. Chances are you can't read the document I'm giving you. And so you're taking me at my word, and I'm not trustworthy. That's my wife. But the second issue is, how do these guys claim that they have superior rights when they're claiming land grants that have been given to them by a Dutch corporation that hasn't been in power for 180 years, and okay, it's re-endorsed by the British Crown, which hasn't been in power here in 50 plus years. I mean, and you're claiming you have rights given to you by people we threw out in a revolution where every man is his own man. And every man is a king, and yet you're claiming that you can hold me down because you have rights from the English king. This is not a concept that sits well, and for that, trust me, this is where McCurdy is brilliant, his whole analysis of that. But anyway, okay, backing up just a hair. The original part of the violence starts in June of 1839, right after the rent boycott is called. Stephen IV gets judgments and writs of eviction against a number of the prominent boycotters up in the hill towns in Albany County. He gets Sheriff Archer to go up to evict these farmers, teach them a lesson, and as they ride up the hill in the town of Knox, they hear tin horns echoing from the hillsides. They have no idea what this means. I mean, boy, there must be an awful lot of hungry farmhands being called in for lunch. And as they crest the hill, they are confronted with 25 Calico Indians, heavily armed, in disguise. They are informed that the wise choice is to turn tail and go back down the hill because this is Calico Indian territory, and if you don't do this, there's going to be violence. Sheriff Archer turns and goes back down to his office in Albany. He comes back up 6 weeks later with a posse of 25 men, figuring this is a show of force that will clearly intimidate the Calicos, and he finds 120 of them waiting for him at the top of the hill. Turns tail, heads back down. He comes back up in December. He has 500 men in his posse. They've put the word out. Everybody is coming together. It's a great, joyous ride up to the hill in the wintertime. So there's 500 guys backing up the sheriff, and when they crest the hill, there's 1,500 Calico Indians. He is stripped of his papers. He is sent back in disgrace. I mean, with 500 guys, he can't enforce law and order. Governor William Seward declares that the militia has now been called in. He sends two militia regiments up to the hill towns. The Calico Indians have evaporated, hidden their costumes, gone back to work. They're hanging out in their house saying, we don't know anything about that. Calico Indians, wow. But Seward issues a call for legislative action to remedy this disorder. And so in January of 40, Stephen Van Rensselaer IV issues his formal counteroffer to the petitions that have now come in from both sides of the river. He is demanding $4 an acre for Hilltown property, and for those of you who try and garden up here, you may know that the soil up on top of these hills is not exactly rich, but he wants $4 an acre for the hill farms, more, but to be negotiated on a farm-by-farm basis for the richer soil in the flatlands. All arrears must be paid in full before he will negotiate with you. He wants additional money, but negotiable on a case-by-case basis for the water rights, the service buyout, and the quarter sale buyouts. William Patterson Van Rensselaer follows his big brother's lead, just a month or two later, issuing the exact same demand out here to the farmers in Rensselaer County. Almost every single farmer refuses. And I might add, if I didn't already say it, at the time of Stephen III's death, there were roughly 3,100 tenant farmers here on the patroonship. So everybody refuses it. The February of 1840 is the first tar and feathering of a deputy sheriff in Albany County. A man named Wilson, basically saying, you know, Sheriff Archer, you're doing this all wrong. You don't go up with a show of force. These guys are my friends, they're my neighbors. I'll go up and take care of this on my own. Well, he rides up the hill, he is stripped of his papers, he is tarred and feathered. And I don't know if you've really thought about what that means. Tarring is applied to you while it's boiling hot. You can die of being tarred. The feathers are just indignity. You know, it's the tar that hurts you, and people are scarred for life. I mean, people are disabled for life if they survive this. So this is a nasty thing to be doing to somebody. And so Deputy Wilson is in fact tarred and feathered. In 1843, Rensselaer County sees its first violence when Sheriff Reynolds, with a posse, riding out through the town of Sand Lake, is disarmed by a superior force of Calico Indians, and the deputy, who is found to be in possession of the eviction papers and the writs, is pulled off his horse and tarred and feathered in front of Sheriff Reynolds and the rest of the posse. See what happens? Yeah. Deputy Lewis, in May of that year, again, going to Reynolds and saying, you're doing this all wrong. You don't do this, you know, en masse. I know these guys. They're my friends. I'll go out and do this all on my own. Tarred and feathered. December of '44, Columbia County has a very violent episode where there's a mass meeting of the Calico Indians. Sheriff Miller, down there in a show of bravado that is probably more boneheaded than brave, decides to ride past this mass meeting of 2,000 plus Calico Indians and supporters with his posse. They are stopped, they are stripped of the papers are burned in front of his eyes, they are stripped of their weaponry, and they are sent back to headquarters in Hudson in disgrace. A shot rings out during this. There are some historians who very convincingly argue that this is an assassination attempt against the leader of the Calico Indians, who is, of course, in disguise, but goes by the name Big Thunder. And Big Thunder happens to be Dr. Smith Boughton of Alps, New York. Smith Boughton is both a boycott leader and a Calico Indian leader, and there are people who believe that this was clearly an assassination attempt against Big Thunder, but the sheriff goes back down to Hudson and has Big Thunder and Little Thunder indicted for manslaughter, claiming that it was a Calico Indian weapon that killed the 16-year-old boy who happens to step in the way of the bullet. They are brought down, they're arrested, they're brought down to Columbia County, and word sweeps the 16 counties that an attack is going to be made to free Big Thunder and Little Thunder. That never happens, but the governor calls out the militia, posts troops all around Hudson to protect the sanctity of law enforcement. They are actually ruled that that's an accidental homicide, and the two of them are released from that. In December 20th of '44, there's a very nasty episode out in Grafton, New York, where a group of 50 Indians being told that there is a small body of men who have been lumbering off land that belongs to William Patterson Van Rensselaer. They go out to put a stop to this. An argument ensues. Pistols are drawn on both sides, and a local man working for Van Rensselaer is killed. A number of people are charged, although there are no convictions in that. Now, the demise of the Calico Indians as a force in this whole fight comes about in August of 1845, down in Delaware County. Under Sheriff of Delaware County, Osmond Steele, is leading a posse down. In particular, they are aiming at the farm of one Moses Earl, who is widely known to be a leader of the boycott and probably a Calico Indian down there in Delaware County. And they ride down to the base of the hill. They stop at a tavern to spend the evening before they ride up to do the eviction. Osmond Steele, who's apparently a real fan of liquid courage, is heard several times to loudly declare that they're safe because lead can't penetrate steel. Yeah, God loves a challenge. Do I need to really go into detail? They go up to the Earl farm. Calicos are there in force. Shots are fired. Osmond Steele falls mortally wounded. He dies later that day. And the governor of the state of New York declares martial law in Delaware County, Schoharie County, and Columbia. Even though nothing's happened in Columbia County for probably 6 or 7 months now, it's been real quiet, but the Livingstons want martial law over there. And so troops march down into Delaware and Schoharie, and the Livingstons basically hire gangs of thugs and sweep through the Calico Indian anti-rent areas of Columbia County, burning homes, burning barns, forcing people to flee. I mean, it's horrible. Historians refer to this as the Delhi Reign of Terror. There are 240 people, well actually there's over 300 arrested in Delaware County alone. 240 of them are convicted, and I love this part. Judge Amaza Parker, Albany County Supreme Court judge. He is famous today as one of the founders of Albany Law School. He is assigned to go down to Delaware County and preside over all of these cases. Get ready for this. He convicts 240 of the 300 plus people who have been arrested in less than 3 weeks. 240 convictions. I mean, assuming, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He puts in 10-hour days, no meal, no bathroom breaks. I mean, he does 5 days a week. He averages 1.6 convictions an hour. Well, you're guilty. You're kind of cute. We'll give you a misdemeanor. You, oh, you look guilty as sin. Me. And you, oh, you're going up. You're a murderer. You're going to the chair. Actually, there is no chair. You're going to hang at Dannemora. So, I mean, they send mass quantities of people. Over in Columbia County, Belden and Smith Boughton are convicted. They are sent to Dannemora prison. In the collection of the Gateway in Troy, I own the Diary of Convicts of Clinton Prison. That's Dannemora. The state of New York had recently discovered a very promising outcropping of iron ore that they wanted to mine, and they didn't have manpower to do it. Well, if we can't find people to be hired, where are we going to get manpower? Yeah, prisoners. They make real good help. Prisoner number 168. Now leave the book open. Smith A. Boughton, sent to Dannemora from Columbia County. The very next page, starting at prisoner number 179, the first 14 of the convictions from Delaware County, and the very first one listed is Moses Earl, on whose farm Osmond Steele was killed. Anyway, okay, gotta move. Okay, Governor Young is basically ends up commuting a number of these conviction sentences, and the outrage from the up-renters leads to him being tossed out on his ear in the election of that year. Governor Silas Wright, the newly elected governor, comes in and commutes the death sentences and ends up pardoning almost all of the Delhi convictions and Dr. Smith Boughton, after he is presented with a petition with in excess of 25,000 signatures demanding their release. The demise of the Indians as a cohesive force basically brings about mass evictions. The sheriffs the thugs being hired by the landlords are no longer fearful of running into Indians. A number of the landlords offer buyouts to their tenants, and many of the tenants decide that this is clearly the smart way to resolve this, and so they either pack up and leave, or they buy out their interest, earning actually a fee interest. J. Gould, the robber baron of the later 1800s, his father actually abandons the farm down there in Delaware County and moves away. Political infighting strangles the anti-rent movement as a political force. There are absolutely no legislation passed between 1848 and 1860 that's pro the renters. The division in the Whig Party leads to mass defections to both the Democrats and the Free Soil Party. The Whig Party collapses as a political entity. The number of the anti-rent speakers and other farm holders, they all end up heading out to the Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin. In 1854, when 52 men get together in Ripon, Wisconsin to come up with a new political party, which they call the Republican Party. 2 of the 52 men who are there active that day are anti-rent fugitives from this area, including Alvin Beauvais, who was one of the main speakers over there on the other side. Disgusted at being forced to pay taxes on income that they're not really picking up, Stephen Van Rensselaer IV, finally just in disgust, sells off his interests to his cousin-in-law. Again, there's no such thing, but you all know what I'm talking about. Walter S. Church in 1853 for what is basically 60 cents on the dollar, with all back rent that is collected due and owing to Stephen IV. He makes no settlement offer to the estimated 600 remaining farmers of his tenant rabble. William Patterson Van Rensselaer largely offers the same terms 2 years later to his own 500, give or take, farmers, and when most of them turn him down, he sells off the balance of his claims to Walter Church, free and clear, 50 cents on the dollar, and no back rent. You take whatever you get, and he and his wife move off to New York City, largely because she has been very much intimidated. Their house, Beverwick, up on what's today Washington Avenue Extension in Rensselaer, even though there's no more Calico Indians to threaten people, every time she gets in the carriage and goes out to go for a ride or go someplace, silent men on horseback fall in and ride along without saying a word. There's no threat, there's no intimidation. Swear to God, oh, that's not what we're doing. Yes, and she finally says to William, we're out of here. So he sells out and goes. Walter Church pursues this with a vengeance. I mean, he believes he has found a way of making a real good living. He goes effectively against Rensselaer County for several years, offering rather favorable buyouts because he's looking to get a cash corpus to go after the troublemakers in Albany County. He offers $2.60 an acre with 7% interest on the back rent that's agreed to, and he'll hold the note, but you will pay him upfront for your acreage, and you will pay on the note, and if you refuse once, just once, you are forever off of his negotiating list. That's his policy. And so his 2 law firms in Rensselaer and Albany County are said to be the 2 busiest law firms in America in the period between 1853 and the Civil War. After being shot at twice, Church stops personally attending the evictions. He just uses the sheriffs to go. Final court cases in 1859 and 60 basically dispose of the last legal claims against the patroon system, the deception in the inducement, and the fact that they don't have good valid title. The New York State Court of Appeals says that statute of limitations is long since gone on this, and we're not going to deal with it. You've been living under the system, you'll continue. This part I love. In April of 1865, through some blatant bribery, Walter Church gets himself commissioned as the colonel of the brand new 25th Regiment of the New York State National Guard. And without asking permission from anybody, in particular the governor, Reuben Fenton, at the time, he takes the regiment and moves them up into the hill towns of Albany County. And he quarters them in farmers' houses and barns. You know, that 8th Amendment thing about no quartering soldiers in peacetime? That's just the Constitution. Who worries about that crap? And I mean, they go up, and for 2 weeks, they pillage and plunder the hill towns of Albany. So he comes back down, and Governor Fenton pulls him out on a carpet and rails him. How dare you do this? This is completely unacceptable. And he does it again in July. And then, to add insult to injury, sends a bill to the state of New York for his bill of costs, including $1,500 a week for his salary as colonel of the 25th Regiment for taking the men up to pillage and plunder Albany County. Well, he loses his colonel's birds and he is removed, but just the end of the war gives him all kinds of manpower to pursue. I do have to move along. To a large degree, the very last of the violence, especially over here, is 1869. When Deputy Sheriff Willard Griggs is killed while trying to evict the Whitbeck family down in East Greenbush. Whitbeck and his sons are charged with homicide. The trial is moved to Saratoga County. They are acquitted, largely because the testimony of Church's group in fact shows that the injury suffered by Deputy Griggs was a long cut behind his ear, and the Whitbecks were armed with rifles and the thugs were armed with hatchets. And one of them threw the hatchet at the group fighting in front of the buckboard, and so Willard Griggs is killed by one of his own. The last blood in Albany County is April of '82, when Deputy Chamberlain is met with a shotgun blast while attempting to evict a farm family up in East Bern. Walter Church goes bankrupt in the 1870s over the costs of litigation and the cost of borrowed money, because he is living high on the hog, expecting that he's going to be a rich man, and he is frittering away the money that he does collect. He dies in December of 1890. The estate later assigns most of his remaining claims to the various lawyers who have been working for him. His daughter does keep some of them, but the lawyers themselves take these in lieu of monetary payment, and most of them are allowed to go stale. But to this day, there are, especially long-term tenancies up here in Rensselaer and Albany counties, where people who go to sell the farm and discover that the title search comes back and says, I'm sorry, you haven't paid ground rent since 1840. Well, the question is, who do you pay it to? I mean, most of this belongs to people that we can't find. I mean, I myself am a member of Our Lady of Victory Parish in Troy. And when we went to build our new church, I got a phone call from Father Randy saying, Michael, you got to come up here. And I walked in, and he slides me papers, and he says, we have a major problem. And I'm looking, it's the title search. And it says, I mean, we just celebrated our 75th anniversary, and we haven't paid ground rent in 75 years. Okay. 4 bushels of good merchantable winter wheat. I mean, okay, I can probably come up with that, but where the hell am I going to find a horse and wagon for 75 days? What are you talking about, Father? I don't know any problem. Yes. Yeah. But the bottom line is, and I know I do have to move, of the 3 people who claimed interests under this lease and fee agreement, all of them ate bitter fruit. After 14 and 17 years respectively, and nearly complete legal vindication, the sale price that was obtained by Stephen IV and William Patterson Van Rensselaer turns out to have been substantially less than it would have been if they had accepted that very first offer of 1839 from the tenant committee. Walter Church, who gambled everything he had on this attempt to become rich, went to his grave bankrupt and bitter, convinced that he had been betrayed by his cousins-in-law. The irony of this is, in every known case, not one single tenant that we have found so far made out any better than they would have if they had accepted the first offer from the Van Rensselaers. Despite all the violence, the bitterness, the years of activity to fight the perceived wrongs of this system, the accumulated back rent added to the buyout price substantially increased the extinguishment price that was paid. The only people who really escaped that are those who just walked away, leaving their years, and in some cases generations, of work behind. As so often happens, there are just no true winners in a war, and especially, well, except for the lawyers. And we have a problem with this? Makes perfect sense to me. All right, now, one last issue. If you think we are talking about ancient history here, I am holding in my hand a copy of a newspaper article from the New York Times. Actually, this is the Associated Press pickup of it. Wednesday, January 21, 2004, 10 years ago. Federal court upholds mask ban at rallies. Byline, New York. A group that mimics the Ku Klux Klan in robes, hoods, masks, and beliefs cannot cloak itself in the First Amendment. Power to escape a state law banning masks at public gatherings. A federal appeals court ruled Tuesday, giving you the condensed version. While the First Amendment protects the rights of citizens to express their viewpoints, however unpopular, it does not guarantee ideal conditions for doing so, wrote the court. It added that the individual's right to speech must always be balanced against the state's interest in safety and its right to regulate conduct that it legitimately considers potentially dangerous. In the ruling, the court upheld the state law that says a person is guilty of loitering for joining others, quote, in being masked or in any manner disguised by unusual or unnatural attire or facial alteration, close quote.
There goes those the policemen with their masks.
You're just looking to cause trouble now,
My father is a liar.
Yeah. Hang on a second, let me write this down. She doesn't like lawyers or cops. Yep, okay. The Second Circuit said it agreed that the robe, mask, and hood were expressive in a way that wearing a uniform is expressive, but said that the mask does not communicate any message that the robe and hood do not. The expressive force of the mask is therefore redundant and legitimately suppressed. Last paragraph. The state law was passed in January 1845, August, in response to civil unrest in upstate New York resulting from groups of tenants disguised in calico gowns and leather masks, forcibly stopping landlords from trying to evict farmers or conduct distress sales. So it may be ancient history, but it's 10 years ago. And on that note, unless there are questions, comments, or concerns,
I remember my mother saying when they bought the property in Albany County that they had to pay the equivalent of so many bushels to somebody to clear the final something.
I have
1947.
Well, that's funny, because I was just about to say, the last one that I have found, and I really do need to take some serious time and go through the county clerk's records in Rensselaer, the last one that I know of for certain, an extinguishment to a church heir, is 1946. On what some of you will recognize as the Tar Box Farm on Route 7, Hoosick Road, out in center Brunswick. They had to pay $100 cash money to the granddaughter to extinguish her continuing rights to ground rent on the Tar Box Farm. But they did settle for cash.
They said it was to an old woman in Albany.
That could very well be. I mean, they were scattered around. There is actually a firm in Boston that claims they are, in London, that claims that they own many of the rights. I've never seen anything that confirms that, but it will on occasion show up in title searches, and the title company will say, you know, send a letter, offer them $100, and they'll sign off all their rights if they have any. Yeah, called the quitclaim deed. Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm selling you everything I own, but I don't think I own any. But yeah, give me $100 and that's good. So, okay, I believe there's somebody starting after me. Thanks very much for having me.
If anybody's interested, we have a full copy of all the Whitbeck murder transcriptions down at the Rensselaer County Historical Society in a research library. And if anybody's really interested in Walter Church's mantles, his house was taken down for the Target. Actually, it was taken down for 5 parking spaces for Target, which nobody ever parks over there, which is really interesting. And before they dismantled the house, before the house was torn down, they went through and photographed the house, and we ended up with 2 mantles in a cupola. So we've got the 2 mantles if anybody ever wants to see them.
That was actually one of his eviction houses. He himself, lived down on State Street in Albany. But, that was the one that he used to have the pretty young things to entertain the judges to go up there. Yeah. Yes. I have no idea what that means. Yes, sir.
There were Calico Indians in Massachusetts too, as far as I know, because on Route 7, where the Appalachian Trail crosses Route 7, there's a big monument there explaining that. You know, they had the same rent wars there as they had here, according to that monument.
That's news to me.
Yeah.
This is right where the trail crosses Route 7?
Well, where the trail used to cross. I haven't been there.
Well, yeah.
They keep moving it all the time, into the woods as much as possible.
Video.
Okay.
And then
Now, and basically what happened originally was my wife and I were looking for a house, and we looked around in several places and didn't have much luck. And we were going by the Brainerd Depot one day, and we saw a plastic for sale sign on the corner, so we decided, well, we'll take a look at this and see what the story is. And from there, it's just went on. I found out who owned it, and it turned out it was the father of a couple of guys I went to school with. So that was pretty interesting. We got talking, and he said that it was his father's, and his father didn't do anything with it. His father had just passed away, so he said, I'm putting it up for sale. So we looked it over, and it was in pretty rough shape. I've got some pictures up here of the building when we first got it. And when you see the pictures, if you ever feel discouraged about restoring an old building, you'll lose your discouragement right away. The building, we did a little history, research on it after we got it, but when we first got it, basically the most important thing was to stabilize the structure, because the roof leaked and the foundation was going underneath it. It needed to be jacked up and straightened out, one thing and another. So the first thing we did was put down a brush around the building. And there were trees as big as that on the front lawn. My wife swears that the building didn't exist until after we bought it, because you couldn't see it from Route 13. And so the first thing we did, as I say, was we cut down all the brush around the building and all the junk around it. And then we had a guy come in with a backhoe and haul all the tree roots and stumps and everything else out of the lawn. And all along Route 13 there was an embankment of what looked like driftwood. It was all pulling out roots and stumps that were probably as long as this room. This pile of, as I call it, driftwood. And so we got all that pulled out of there. And then once we got the stuff out of the way, we were able to jack the building up, because the building was sagging awful bad. The left front corner had to come up almost 2 feet. The left rear corner had to come up over a foot. The right rear corner had to come up about 8 inches, and the right front corner was okay. And then, of course, when you start to raise the corners of a building, the middle sags. So you've got to get under there and raise the middle as well. So a friend of mine from Old Chatham came up, and he and another gentleman from East Nassau, Art Layer, and myself went to work on this place and started to jack it up and get it straightened out. Just to show you what the building was like before we did anything to it, I'll pass this picture around. As I say, don't ever feel discouraged about putting an old building over. It really looked worse than it was. A lot of people see old buildings and they think the vines are growing up around them, the bushes are growing up around them, they're going to fall down, let's raise it and forget it. Well, after doing this is why when the Brainerd Church got torn down, I was very disappointed, because I was told by a professional engineer that it would run about $135,000 to fix that church up. And the church was a very stable structure, even after the fire. And considering what just my wife and I did to restore this depot, the church wouldn't have been that hard to do. Unfortunately, there was a lot of politics and a lot of lack of interest and a lot of stuff going around that probably shouldn't have been there, but it was. And so unfortunately it was a situation where I couldn't get the building preserved. And it would have been really nice to save it, because I think it could have been really well used in the community. But anyway, when you see that picture, you'll see that there's not too much that isn't restorable if you put your mind to it. There are some places that are really, really going, but for the most part, these buildings can be saved. You just have to be willing to do it. That building, to get it restored to restored railroad depot without making it a house, ran into the $20,000s of dollars. And that was because we were willing to work ourselves. There is that word that comes up quite often when you get an old building. It's that 4-letter word called work. And you do have to do it. There's no question about it. It's not, there's another 4-letter word, it's easy. Well, easy isn't always the way things are going to go. You've got to take your time with something like this. And what we did was, we lived elsewhere and we fixed the building up. Now, it was my wife and myself. We were only 23, 22-year-old kids, you know. We wanted to restore this building. How were we going to do it? Well, when we bought it, first thing we did, after we got all the junk cleaned up around it, before we jacked it up, we were talking to different contractors about restoring it. We were told it was going to cost $185,000 to make it into a house, and some crazy
prices, and then people would go driving along, they'd look at the roof, and they'd say, that's an old roof. I'd say, yeah, it is an old roof. Well, what are you going to do with it? So I'm going to keep it. Well, it's got lichens on it, and it's, it's really old. I says, yeah, but it was 100,000 years old when they put it up there. It's a slate. Well, basically what ended up happening was, we got Leo and our layer and myself, and we got together and jacked the building up. Got it straightened out, and then I wanted to do the foundation over, good and solid, so this building would have a good solid foundation to sit on. And the foundation originally was dry rubble. There was no mortar in the stones. So yours truly asked a friend to help him. The friend was there for about a half an hour, and he said, this is too much work, I don't want to do about it. I said, okay, fine. So yours truly got up, got over to the depot every morning at 6:30, and worked right straight through till 10:30 at night, 7 days a week for 3 weeks. And by hand, dug that old foundation out, mortared all the stones together, and put it all back together again, and we let the building down. And if one guy can do that, can you imagine what it would be like if you had a family, or just 3 or 4 people working? The time would be cut in quarters. It can be done, because I did it. And I bought concrete, and we didn't have any water in the building. We didn't have any electricity. So I went down to the firehouse pond right here, got 2 buckets at a time, mixed all the mortar in an old wheelbarrow with a cast iron wheel on it, mixed all the mortar up, mortared everything together, made trip after trip to the pond, filled that wheelbarrow over and over and over, and dumped that concrete in and mortared all that stone together. It's just me doing it. Granted, after I was through, at the end of the day, you see these people that build houses 100 years ago, and the only thing that shines is their teeth and their watch chain. Well, I'll tell you, I was as black as coal, and the only thing that shined were my teeth and my watch chain. That was filthy. And in his pictures, I'm holding the crowbar from heaving stones around. Well, I know, when I see those pictures 100 years ago, I know exactly what they did, because I ended up doing it. And with the old equipment, because as I say, there was no electricity, no running water there. We had a blessing of the pond and a lot of hard work. So anyway, we got the foundation done, and then it was to do the roof, because foundation and roof are your 2 most important things. If the roof leaks, you can fix everything. Once that roof starts to leak, you start getting damage inside, and floors warp and things start to rot. And I don't worry so much about warping. I don't worry so much about swelling and discoloration. I'm looking at the building and saying, okay, in order to save this building, we now have a decent foundation under it, but we can't have it rotting away. It's got to stand up to the weather. So the next thing to do is get that roof repaired. So I learned how to cut and drill, but you don't drill, you punch, slate. I learned how to fit it. I learned what sizes they used. I got all the tools to do it. And I went out and I went up to Granville, to Evergreen Slate Company, and bought 1,000 slates at a time. And I bring them down. And I started at one end of the roof, went from one end to the other, started in the front left, went to the front right, and then from the rear left, or the rear right as you're facing the front of the building, over to the rear left. And I just kept turning the ladder over and over and moving down. And every slate that was chipped or cracked or broken or had holes in it or whatever, I took the slate ripper and took it off. And what I found was the old repairs that were done in the 1870s were done beautifully. They take a shingle and they put a nail in it, and they put a piece of zinc over the nail so it wouldn't leak. They slide it up into the gusset, and you never even had a slate hook in the wall. It was beautifully done. But some of those zinc strips were starting to go, so I pulled them out and I replaced them with copper. And I didn't have to do anything. Then when you got into the repairs that were done in the 1920s through the 50s, that's where the sloppy work came in. That's where people started to use tar on the slate roof, which is something you never do. It just made a mess. When I went to pull one slate out, or one of those repairs was, I had to pull out 7 or 8 around it because it was just garbage work. So I just pulled the whole mess off and let it slide down the roof and smash on the ground and replace all 5 slates in that area. And it was the only way to do it because they did such a sloppy job. And the slates were all stuck together with old tar, so you couldn't get them apart. And it just wasn't worth it trying to save those slates that were all jammed together. So anyway, we got the slate roof done. And then put a metal ridge cap on the top. And that was basically it. We did it without using hooks. We started to use hooks, and then I thought, you know, the snow's not going to slide off this roof with all these hooks in it. I want the snow to slide off. And so what we ended up doing was the same as the repairs in the 1870s. When you got to one slate, it was left to be repaired. You had all the slates in the roof around it. You took that one slate, you slid it up in there, and you drove a nail in between the two slates above it. And of course, there's where a leak would be. But to stop the leak, you take a piece of copper and slide it up underneath those two upper slates, over the nail, and headlap it up into the slate above, and that automatically stops your leak. And it alleviates the problem of having hooks break off and come off and bend and all that kind of thing. So we ended up doing the roof that way, and we saved it. Then when it came to the building itself, what do you do on one of these old buildings to save money and preserve the structure? Well, the first thing you don't do is replace all the windows. The first thing you do not do on one of these old buildings is go to somebody and say, I want thermal pane, brand new windows and everything. Because it's going to cost you a fortune. And if you're young people and you're just starting out, as we were, as I say, in our 20s, at so much per window, even if you finance it, you're going to have a bill eventually that you're going to have to pay off plus interest. This is the thing you want to avoid. So what you do is you take your old window sashes out and you putty and you fix those windows. You scrape out all the old putty, you put new glazier's points in, you put glass back in, and you put your old windows back in. Because if you don't, it's going to cost you a fortune to do the kind of work that you want to do restoring an old house, especially, as I say, if you're young, you're starting out, or if you're well established, but you don't have a whole lot of money to spend. The less you replace, the less you have to buy. And the more you keep, the more original your building is, and the more historically correct it is. So if you've got all original windows, that's what you do. In our case, the window sashes had 6 panes in the top and 6 in the bottom. And somebody had, of course, thrown rocks through the boards and smashed out all of the sash lights and broken all the dividers out and everything. So what we did temporarily was we took the old window sashes and put one big pane of glass in each one. That took care of the problem. We had windows. No storms, but we had windows. Then, from there, we went to cleaning up the inside. Well, there's a nice maple floor inside. Yeah, it never had any finish on it. It was gray, it was dirty, it was filthy and all that. But cleaned up, it was a pretty nice floor. So we said, okay, here's a nice maple floor. This could be refinished. It really made nice. So we saved it. The inside of the room still had all the wainscoting to the chair rails. Chair rails are 4 feet high. Vertical wainscoting to the chair rails. All the trim around the windows was still there. The walls from the chair rail up to the ceiling, that's 8 feet, because the whole room has a 12-foot ceiling. All the rooms are 12 feet high. All the wainscoting was in there, and it was all in good condition. So you've got 2 choices. Either you strip it and you refinish it, or you paint it. But you don't replace it. Because, again, if you replace the wainscoting, then you're ripping out all the historic look of the place. And the wainscoting is the way all these old stations were built. They didn't put sheetrock in there years ago. Many, many years ago, before the upper wainscoting was put in, the ceiling was put in with wainscoting, there was a plaster wall from the chair rail up to the ceiling, and the ceiling was plastered. But with the trains coming through, that plaster was breaking. And so in the 1870s, they said, the heck with it, took the plaster down and wainscoted the rest of the room. And I thought, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Well, then you say, what do you do about insulating? Because you got these walls on the outside, and you got walls on the inside. What are you going to do? Because you want to be warm. And they did. They leaked pretty bad. So what you do is you get blown in fiberglass, not celluloid, because celluloid is old newspaper, basically. In fact, when you look at celluloid fiber fill, you can actually read the print on the stuff. And if it gets wet, it holds moisture. And when it holds moisture, it brings in carbon ants, it rots the walls, it rots the sills, it does a lot of damage. So we said, well, if we're going to insulate this place, anything we can't get at, hollow walls, we're going to fill with fiberglass insulation. So we had an insulating company come down, and the end walls, there were no fire stops, and inside, no cats in the walls sometimes as they're called. We blew the insulation down into the walls. On the sides, where we had top plates, and you couldn't get down in there, you take a piece of siding off, and underneath the siding is your heavy sheathing. Drill a hole in the sheathing, and you blow the fiberglass in and fill that cavity. Then you go along to your next one. Then when you put your piece of siding back on, there aren't holes drilled in your siding. It looks nice. And you plug the old holes underneath with with sheathing plugs. So you don't have to worry about re-siding the outside of the house because you had it insulated and you don't have these big holes showing, big plug marks. The only place there were plug marks on the place was underneath the window, where when you squirted insulation in from the top, it couldn't get down underneath the window. So underneath the windows in those cavities, between the studs, that's where it had to be drilled from the outside. And that was because the lower siding was also novelty siding. The upper siding is regular lap siding. But the lower novelty siding was a job to get off, so that's where we drilled through and did it from the outside. But that saved us the trouble of pulling all the wainscoting down inside and all the moldings off and everything else just to insulate a house. So it did save an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of time. And then, of course, over time, we ended up painting, we ended up refinishing, we ended up doing a lot of stuff over time in the house. And what we did, we didn't move in there as a house right away. We fixed it up as a restored depot over a 3-year period. Within 6 months, it was basically solid. The roof was good and the bottom was good, but there was no insulation. We made it a solid building. Then, for 3 years, we ran our business out of it. And that building paid for itself in the first 6 months we were running our business out of it. So then we were able to sock more money away in time, living elsewhere, renting elsewhere, and we were able to take that money and eventually say, okay, now we want to live under this roof and have our business under this roof. How are we going to do this? Well, we were able to put a new